Hello and welcome to the podcast According to Sci-Faith, where we discuss topics revolving around the compatibility of science and faith. I'm Joshua Göcking and you're listening to According to Sci-Faith. Episode 15: Darwin's Mistake and the Theodicy question. Recently, I read a book. Last year that I read a book. It was actually in the beginning of the last year, so it's been a while. But I read this book by a historian, Tom Holland, so not the actor. There's a historian who is named the same, and he wrote about basically about Christian history. The book is called Dominion, and it is really about Christianity from its emergence to now how it has shaped culture, how it has participated in creating especially what is now called Western culture, and the effects it had and how profound those were. And this is really an interesting book. If you're a believer or an unbeliever, it is really an interesting book. Tom Holland himself, I believe, is not a believer in the sense that he really has a relationship to Jesus. I don't know myself. He only knows that, but that's the idea you're getting from the book. But he has an appreciation of the effect Christianity has on culture and on world history. So if you're really interested in this, he has also a podcast, The Rest is History, where he with another historian, Dominic Sandbrook, talks about these topics, not only about these topics, they talk about history in general, but he oftentimes brings in the effect Christianity has had on on world history. And it's really interesting, but it's also interesting to read a book because there he really dives in deep into it, and where you see how many things were really affected by Christianity. And he covers the certain areas also. He covers all of the Middle Ages, all of the time afterwards, the Renaissance, the Reformation, and also the modernity. And he comes also to the time where science came up, where the scientific revolution came up, and there he also covers, of course, Darwin and his theory of evolution, and how Darwin, as somebody who was believing in the beginning, more and more lost his faith, and how he argued about losing his faith. And if you read it in this context of this book, in the context of the history he describes before, I think you realize some mistake, in my opinion, Darwin made in his conclusions, because Tom Holland starts this by really describing almost at the same time or sometime before what happened. What he also credits Christianity to is the abolition of slavery. So what he writes there is when the colonization took place and the New World was discovered and colonized, of course, there was this one clergyman, or I think actually he was a Quaker. He was Benjamin de la Casas, Bartholomew de la Casas was his name, and he was the first one who was really critical about slavery and about the conditions in which the slaves were held in these colonies, and who really was the first who came up with this idea of being created equal before God, and that this also holds, of course, to the slaves that they were holding. And over the time, it led to slavery or the slave trade being abolished, and this was done by the British Empire, which at this time was really the world dominating force. It had the greatest navy, so it was ruling the seas, and therefore it was not only saying, okay, we won't trade slaves anymore, which was accomplished by William Wilberforce, also a Christian, who managed to get this through the British Congress at this time, and but this was achieved by the British, but they, of course, said, okay, if we are not trading slaves, we won't allow the others to have the same benefit, because that's bad for business, of course. But also they did not say it like that, but they also had spiritual reasoning behind it. Whether this was honest or not, you can argue yourself, but still they forced other nations and other cultures to abolish the slave trade also. And one of these cultures, which also was trading slave and never in their own religion had seemingly saw any contradictions to it up to that point, was the Muslim culture. And the British basically enforced upon the Muslims to abolish the slave trade in their nations. This is how Tom Holland writes it, at least, or that's the impression you get. And he also writes that they themselves then argued using this when they were forced to do it like that. They argued that they did it also because their laws basically implied it, that their laws also implied that slavery is wrong, and so on and so on. So whatever you believe, you can argue about whether this is true or not, but from the historic evidence this historian presents, it seems pretty believable to me. But what it really shows, and I think what really was the case, is that through this statements and through the world powers, the Christianly dominated world powers, arguing in such a way that is basically natural law, that every man is created equal and so on, that they were arguing from those are laws of nature and not laws of our religion, but they were arguing those are laws of nature and you need to oblige to. They did not come to these countries that were not Christian and say you have to do it because our God says so, but they came to them saying you have to do it because the laws of nature are saying so, because otherwise they could not argue this way, because what do other religions care about what your God is saying, basically. That's so they needed to have a different argument, and the argument was the laws of nature say so. And whether this is right or wrong, I mean, there were different, I mean, he goes also in, it would lead too much, but he goes also in on the Marquis de Sade, who had a really different idea what the laws of nature are saying. And if you look at it from a Christian perspective, you might also come to a different conclusion, as we see later. But this was the mindset that was created in this time, that the laws of nature are basically saying slavery is wrong and so on. All these, everyone is created equal and so on and so on. And this was the mindset with which I assume Darwin looked at the world, because this was the time, this was the society, this was the culture that he lived in. And when he then came to his theory of evolution and lost his faith with time, there was one thing he said what led to him to reject God. And there he said, I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created the Ichneumonidae with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars. So this animal, which I had trouble to pronounce, is apparently is living inside the bodies of caterpillars, kind of like a parasite. And I'm not sure if it's eating him from the inside out or something else, but it's apparently something really bad for this animal. It's like parasites. Basically, he says, to generalize it, he cannot believe in a beneficent and omnipotent God that he would designedly create a world in which there are some things like parasites. And this, I think, comes from his conviction, which he grew up with, that the natural law basically states, yeah, everyone is created equal, and we are all, and so on, we are all have all worth, and so on, which, as a Christian would say, is true, but a Christian would also acknowledge that we are living in a fallen creation. So the Christians always distinguish between the nature before the fall and afterwards. And after the fall, something in creation itself was falling. Animals are eating each other, humans fighting each other. A lot of horrible things are happening in this world, and this is not attributed to a God who wanted it to be like this, but it is attributed to the fall into sin, which came according to the biblical story by Adam, and which has since then been in this world and perverted this wonderful creation by God. So, and I think there's this mistake Darwin did. This is, you can see it clearly, I think, if you read the book, that he assumed something to be true, which was not true without God himself. So what basically the British people, when they enforced the abolition of the slave trade on the other nations did, they argued with divine revelations, but without God himself, but without a God behind it. They said it has to be like this by nature and not because this is how God wanted the creation to be, or the destined creation to be. And so they in essence they took out the fall of it. And then when Darwin looked at nature as it is in biology, in the animal kingdom and so on, when he looked at this as it really is, he said, yeah, but this is in stark contrast to what I have learned it is supposed to be. And since when it was pushed on others to treat everyone equally, it was basically God was basically kind of taken out of the equation in order to make the argument for those who did not believe in this God. Since this was happening, he could not really see that there is a difference, that there has been a fall which led to this nature as it is to not be as it is supposed to be. And I think this was the mistake that he made, and what basically led to him losing his faith and rejecting God. And I think this is clearly seen if one looks at it in this historical context. What Darwin is saying in the statement is basically the theodicy question. This is very much discussed. If you argue with an atheist, at some point it won't be about, science says this and that, and therefore I cannot believe in a God. It's rather something, how could an beneficent and omnipotent God allow such and such? And then they refer to something like suffering and so on, that unfortunately is existing in this world. And as we already mentioned, the answer to this and the answer to the theodicy question almost always is the case that there is a fallen nature, a fallen creation, and which explains why suffering is in this world. Because, of course, there are cases in which this correlation or this causation is not that clear or seems to be not there, but still one can usually explain it in these terms. But the problem oftentimes is that you cannot explain it directly from one point to the other. For example, there is this story in the Gospels where the disciples of Jesus ask Jesus about a blind man, and they ask who in their family or he was born blind, and they ask who has sinned that he has gotten this blindness. So was it his parents, and why did he then obtain it? Or because he was born blind, he could not have been it. And so and Jesus rejects that idea, and he says, okay, this is not, more or less, he says that there's not this direct causation necessarily, but this is leads to something else. But I think oftentimes, and that's my perception of it, asking this theodicy question also is kind of neglecting responsibility for own actions, because if this, what we are talking about, a fallen nature, is that we are basically saying, hey, we brought this upon ourselves. By sinning, by not acting according to God's will, according to the purposes that God had for us, we brought all this pain and suffering on ourselves, and therefore this is not done by God. It's not that God creates the world in this way because he's some sadist or something. No, it's because we have deviated from what he had intended for us, and this way this pain and suffering came into his world, which is not from him but from the enemy, and the Bible is really clear on this. And therefore I think it's oftentimes asking this question, to me it's oftentimes neglecting responsibility. All right, I think it's time for a short break. So before we continue, just let some short announcements. If you want to know more about Sci-Faith, I really encourage you to go to my website, sci-faith.de/en. There you can find out more about this podcast, about my book, and about my blog. So you can read my blog. All the articles are also now in English, so you can read all of them. Also the article which I described in the first episode. And you can also learn more about my book, which is now available in English. So I really encourage you to get it as an ebook and read it, because there really much about what we are talking about is really discussed in a deeper way, and you will understand, I think, a lot more of what I'm talking about if you really have grasped those concepts. Also, there is a new book out, my latest novel, or my first novel also, Alien Thoughts. You can get it on Amazon as an ebook, and I really encourage you to read it. It's really exciting. I have gotten a lot of feedbacks. People really like it, and so I really hope you read it and also give it a 5-star rating, because this always helps people to know what a book is, to understand if it is something for them. And really, if you have the time, I really ask you to write a review of it, such that people really can know what a book is about, know if it's something for them, and so more readers can get aware of this book and can get to enjoy it. It also, of course, all this also supports me in my work, also on this podcast. It gives me more flexibility to produce new episodes. So I really am hoping for your support. Also, if you have ideas or requests or something that you want to have covered in this podcast, feel free to contact me at sci-faith.de/en and then use the contact form. There you can also subscribe to the newsletter, where you will get some special materials. So in the newsletter I write some of the thoughts that are usually not fit for blog posts, but still very interesting topics. So if you want to get this or get news, what happens at Sci-Faith, what's new, what's up, then you will get the latest news. You will really get there, and then I really encourage you to subscribe to my Substack. With that being said, let's continue to the episode. There's a really good novel I recently read that makes this pretty clear. It's from Dostoevsky. It's called The Brothers Karamazov. It's really a powerful novel. I really encourage you to read it. So it's a little bit long, about 1,000 pages, or a little bit more than that even. So, but it's really worth it, because he covers a lot of topics in there. And among others, he covers this theodicy question. And in this book, there are 3 brothers, and he describes the lives of them, the opinions of them. One of them is Alyosha Karamazov, and he is, in the beginning, he is a monk, and all through the book, he is a believer in Christ. And in contrast to him, there's a different brother, Ivan Karamazov, who believes in God, but who still rejects God because of these things, because he believes that a God who is a just God could not allow for such suffering to be in this world, or that he does not accept the justice of such a God. And there is a dialogue between Alyosha Karamazov and Ivan Karamazov in which they discuss these topics, and Ivan Karamazov brings a lot of examples and anecdotes towards this, and he tells of cruel histories that occurred then. So you have to remember this was at a time in Russia, in the Russian Empire, and this was a time where serfdom was still existent, and it was not still existent when the book is written. It was just recently abolished, but the remembrance of this time is still there, and the stories out of these times are still there. And Ivan Karamazov, for example, tells of one story where one landlord is really mean or really evil to the child of some of his servants, and he describes it then as how could a God allowed it. But what I think comes pretty clearly out of this story, at least to me, is where's the father in this? Where's the father of this child? Where's the mother of this child? I mean, they are mentioned there, but they are basically standing by and watching as it happens and allowing it to happen. And there you can already see the neglected responsibility, because even, I mean, it might be coming from a high horse for someone who never lived under the circumstances, but still, I mean, there would be, as a father or as a parent of a child, where no matter who attacks it, there should be this responsibility to say, no, you can't do that. No, that's my child. You have to pass me. That's at least what I think a parent is supposed to do in this situation. And there you already see, as cruel as the story is, as cruel as the behavior of this landlord must have been, there is still the neglected responsibility of those who were responsible for this child. And I think if you look into this, you see that mostly when we ask this question, it points to us pushing a responsibility that is up to us towards God. That if you, for example, if you look at it in another way, where you say, okay, what would be the perfect solution then? Would it be that no matter what, would it be that there's absolutely no suffering in this world? I mean, that would be perfect, you would guess, but it would also mean that whatever we do, there could not be no suffering. So however hurtful we were to other humans, however evil we were to others, it would be not lead to any suffering, anything that might hint at something going wrong or something. I mean, I think if you logically try to think it through, you should come to a conclusion that this would also not be just or could not be just, and it would something where we either are prevented from doing what we from having free will, or where we can do what we want and it just has no effect. So we would also have basically no free will, because whatever we do, it won't have any effect. So where's the free will in that? So if you just make these two statements, that a God creates humans who have free will, then it is there needs to be the responsibility to go against suffering and so on. It needs to be on us and not on God himself. And therefore, if you also look further into the gospel accounts and into really what Jesus did at the cross, then you see that God himself really did everything to alleviate this. It did everything he possibly could to free us from this state, to free us out from the state which we brought upon ourselves by becoming man and by doing by carrying all this for us at the cross and delivering us from it. So if you really look into it, you see there was in the first place, it was on us. It is our responsibility. And in the second state, you see that he still took, as far as it was possible, the responsibility on him by dying for us at the cross and freeing us from this sinful nature. So to answer the theocity question is to say, yeah, it is our responsibility and not his, but he already has taken up our responsibility and delivered us from it. So, of course, if you look then closer, you will still see there's still suffering in this world. Unfortunately, there's still injustice in this world, and there where you also not always can understand, as I said, the direct causation of this, where you don't understand why does this person have to suffer where others who been way worse don't have to. And I think in this context you really have to make this leap of faith where you really say, okay, but can I believe that God's justice is greater than what I can imagine? Can I believe that in the grand scheme of things, beyond this life, beyond this world, in the eternal world in which God is living, that there is still justice coming to be, that the complete justice of God will be really fulfilled there. And I think this faith, I can have this faith, and I can say, even if I really don't understand what everything that happens, really don't understand every suffering that occurs, I really can have faith that in the grand scheme of things, God will bring everything to justice, and have faith in that. And also one more thing to state is that if you are in such a discussion where this question comes up, I mean, what I was answering it in a pretty logical way, which is not always the solution, or is seldom the solution, because this question usually, as you can easily imagine, is not a question of explain to me logically why this occurs, but usually it's an emotional question. Because if you ask why is suffering in this world, why can God allow this, this is usually referred to something personal that you experienced, personal suffering, or a loss of a person that you think was unjust or something like that. And therefore it's an emotional question which can only answered emotionally and not in a logical way, which would seem in most cases, I guess, insulting to that person, understandably so. So if you are in such a discussion, maybe don't come with that logic, but instead come with empathy. And really, if you are yourself in such a situation where you ask yourself questions, where you ask yourself, how can you allow such things to happen, then really make the step of saying, okay, I don't know everything. I think you have to have this humility, and I know that you are God and that you are greater than me, and that your ways are greater than mine, and that even if I don't understand it, that your ways are perfect, and please reveal yourself to me. Then if you have this posture, I think it will be a lot easier to deal with these questions, and I think you will also get then answers for yourselves. Maybe not answers who can be logically conclusive in all ways, but answers you can live with and answers you can accept for yourself, and that will help you to continue on. So that's everything for today's episode. I hope you liked it and you enjoyed each part of it. If you want to get in touch with me or discuss a topic or want to give me some feedback, then feel free to contact me using the contact form on my website, sci-faith.de/en. And there you can go to the contact tab and contact me. And if you have any other things or episodes you want to have covered there, or topics you want to have covered, feel free to contact me there. Also, if you are not yet familiar with the format in which this podcast is produced, let me just briefly explain it to you. So there is always at the beginning of a month or of a block, there is a big block of 4 episodes in one thing. It's kind of like a preview, which I call it, where you have the next 4 episodes all in one episode together, combined. And this is for people who like to hear long format podcasts, who have a long way to work or something else, where they can listen to a long episode and can then have a preview of the next 4 episodes all at once, and are completely up to date from the beginning of the block. For those who like their episodes shorter, who prefer it if they have a half an hour or even less of a podcast episode, for those there is every week afterwards will appear a podcast episode almost in that length, and this way I can publish every week a new podcast every episode, and everyone can have it his own way, either once a month a long chunk of content, or once a week a shorter format podcast episode. So I think that's the best way for everyone, and also for me when I'm producing it. Please also note that this is an independent podcast, which means that it is recorded, produced, and marketed by me. So I really need your support in this. So if you like this podcast, then give it a 5-star rating. And if you have the time, even write a review to it. This just helps other listeners to become aware of this podcast, and then people who might be interested in this content can become aware of it. Also, if you have friends who you think would like this content, then recommend it to them and share it with them. Also, you can support me in other ways, for example by reading my blog and subscribing to my newsletter, or even by reading my books, which you can find on Amazon. For example, there is my latest novel out now is Alien Thoughts, which is pretty entertaining from the feedback that I gotten, and so it's also in some way related to science and faith. The topic of it is also in there, but of course you can also read the book to this podcast, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith, which is also available in English since last year. Thank you for that, and now I wish you a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward for you to tune in again next time.